More festival lineups have been announced. Jay-Z is back. The Weakerthans probably won't be, but we have new Death Cab. I'm Dave. I'm here with Amanda today, and you're listening to Brooklyn Vegan Weekly Podcast, BV Weekly. All right, first we have to get some announcements out of the way. As regular listeners now know, Andrew just had a baby and is taking some weeks off, though also he isn't, because we managed to record him saying some words, which are still going to be part of this episode and were last week. And I also wanted to announce that this week we're beginning a series as part of this podcast where we end the episode looking back at some of our favorite albums turning 30 this year. That would be 1996 albums. Listen all the way to the end to hear which two records we highlight this week. Spoiler, that's one of the two spots in this week's episode where you will hear Andrew speak. Meanwhile, thanks for being here again, Amanda.
Thanks for having me. And Andrew isn't the only one with a new addition to his family. I adopted a cat on Sunday, and he is here with me. So you may hear him contribute to the episode. I'm gonna try to keep him away from the mic, though.
I am really excited about your new cat and the new cat's name. What's the backstory here on the name?
His name is Buckley, and he is my second cat in a row to have a musician-inspired name, named after Jeff Buckley, of course. And I wasn't necessarily planning on him having a musician-inspired name, but when I saw his face, I knew that's what his name was.
That's amazing. I know you're so happy right now, which has also been awesome. Welcome, Buckley, to the BV family as well. But now you just left people wondering what the music-related name of your last cat was.
My last cat was named Rufus, after Rufus Wainwright.
Yes, we miss Rufus. And so, yeah, I know Buckley's been keeping you busy.
Yes, I have not been out to a show all week, although that will change tomorrow. What about you?
Now, I haven't been to a show in a minute. I did go see the new Pixar movie, Hoppers, with my kids. I gotta say, that movie, it's pretty punk, actually. The main character is very much a rebel girl. And sure enough, they managed to land the song Rebel Girl, sorry if this is a spoiler, in the movie. So you hear Bikini Kill in this new kids movie, and the score of the movie was done by Mark Mothersbaugh of Devo. So collectively, pretty punk movie. SZA also did the closing credit song. Not so punk, but also really cool. And there's also a big alt comedy component to the cast. A lot of the comedians that we've loved for like the past 20 years, Brooklyn Vegan covers a lot of comedy, right? Or we used to, we still do. And so there are, just like there's musicians we've kind of grown up with, if you want to say, there's a lot of comedians we've grown up with. And it's always fun to see what they're up to these days, including here's some comedians who have voice roles in this Hoppers movie. Dimitri Martin, Aparna, both Brooklyn alt comedy venue regulars. Friend of the scene, John Hamm plays the bad guy. SNL vets Bobby Moynihan and Vanessa Bayer, both in there. Kathy Najimy, did I get her last name right? AKA Peggy Hill is in there. Who, fun fact, also the mom of musician Samia. Do I pronounce Samia correctly? I say this every time.
I think it's Samia.
Samia, Kathy Najimy, is the mom of musician Samia that you and I both love, which also made me realize there's been all this discourse about Odessa Zion being the voice of Bobby Hill. And it wasn't until I was thinking about after seeing this movie that I just forgot how she has that in common with Samia. You know, both kids of King of the Hill actors. No word on if they actually know each other, though. Speaking of Samia, she plays Coachella, which, believe it or not, is in less than a month. South by Southwest just ended, so now we're on the road to the season's first big festival, which is Coachella. Also, we just got another big festival announcement. Lollapalooza's lineup was announced. That happens, of course, in Chicago from July 30th to August 2nd.
Yeah, this is a pretty interesting lineup. I thought there were a lot of interesting things about this lineup.
Yeah, well, the headliners, first of all, let's just say super pop heavy, as all these festivals are now. We have Charlie XCX, Tate McRae, Lorde, who just announced this week she left Universal and is now independent, apparently. Olivia Dean, John Summit, Jenny from Blackpink.
Yeah, I think having Jenny on the lineup is continuing Lollapalooza's trend of really having a K-pop presence. Feels like they've kind of been on the vanguard of that, along with Coachella. Coachella has too. And that now that you see that at a lot of festivals, but I feel like Lollapalooza was maybe a little early with that.
You know who's also on the headline, but not a headliner? Somber, which I guess it's weird. Like Coachella technically only has 3 headliners, right? But then there's the bands, the artists that are just right under the headliner. So, which in this poster would be headliners. Lollapalooza lists like almost 10 headliners or something like that, just based on font size.
Yeah, Lollapalooza is one of those festivals where you have multiple headliners kind of competing with each other each night versus I feel like, yeah, Coachella does like the single headliner. And I don't know, sometimes I wonder if some of these festivals that list multiple headliners, if it's like a like booking agent, like we have to make this person happy. Um,
Yeah, there's always that like all over the poster for
But
sure.
it's also I mean, it's great from, like, a crowd safety perspective that you're dividing, the people there so they're not all amassing at one stage, and it's great also just to give people options. You have competing headliners who appeal to different people. That's great.
For sure. And the XX are listed as a headliner on this one. When Coachella was announced, that was the first big reveal that the XX were coming back. And it was also the reveal to me that the XX could be listed as the highest band who wasn't a headliner on the flyer. So I was like, oh, wow, the XX, I guess, are big. On Lala, they are actually biggest font, one of the headliners. That's interesting. But then we also still haven't mentioned one headliner who most interestingly is
Yes.
Smashing Pumpkins.
Definitely the most interesting headliner here, their hometown show, and to me, one of the first things that I thought of, I was kinda like, "Oh, interesting that they're headlining Lollapalooza and not another Chicago festival that happens a few months later in September every year, which is Riot Fest."
I remember they did play Riot Fest in the
They
past.
did,
And I
yeah,
remember that especially because you used to think of Riot Fest as mostly just punk, and they really diversified Riot Fest in kind of an all different rock directions. So
and hip hop. Riot Fest also has hip hop now. They've really diversified
oh, yeah, and
quite a
so
bit.
I feel like Smashing Pumpkins stood out as one of those bands where I was like, "Oh, I guess Riot Fest is not just punk." They really fit on both.
They do. There's a precedent at Lollapalooza each year to have like a veteran rock band headliner. Like last year, you had Korn. In 2024, you had Deftones, and I guess Blink 182 kind of fits under that heading to a lesser extent. So it's definitely like not just a pop festival, especially when we get into the undercard, which we will in a second. But I still think it's kind of like wow, like Smashing Pumpkins, along with a lot of these bands that probably appeal to a slightly younger audience. So it part of me is like, of the people who are going to Lollapalooza, I'm very curious to see who is going to Smashing Pumpkins, and I'm curious to see who they play against.
Definitely. We always worry that the veteran rock bands will have small crowds at these fests. And Smashing Pumpkins is also a nod to Lala's past.
Yes.
In the 90s, when Lollapalooza was a touring festival and not just a festival in Chicago, Smashing Pumpkins headlined in 1994 on a year that also had Beastie Boys. Definitely not Smashing Pumpkins' first time with Lala. They also played Lollapalooza Brazil, I believe, a bunch of years ago. But that was like when Lollapalooza. Sorry, I just said Lollapalooza is just a Chicago festival, and then I said they played Brazil. So yes, Lolla technically did expand to South America as well, using the brand name for a festival there.
And India, I believe, right?
Okay,
Maybe Asia.
other
I
countries,
actually
yeah.
could not keep up with all of the different editions of Lollapalooza. I should double check, but I know that there are like now around the world Lollapalooza. And also interesting about Smashing Pumpkins is that this is their only upcoming show at the moment. It seems like Billy Corgan has been so busy with his wrestling stuff, hosting his podcasts. They played shows last year, but this is the first one they've announced this year. So I wonder if it will be part of a tour, if it's a one-off. I guess we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Definitely, it always feels like you get a single festival announcement, then there's got to be more coming.
Did we mention that someone who isn't headlining is Turnstile, which, there's definitely part of me that is kind of like, why aren't Turnstile headlining over Smashing Pumpkins? Like, not that Smashing Pumpkins don't deserve to headline, but I think Turnstile deserve to headline too, and they're certainly a headliner at other festivals. They are the second artist listed on the undercard, so they are, quite high up. But just, kind of an interesting booking decision there.
Yeah, the top line of artists who are technically not headliners. We've got Lil Uzi Vert, Turnstile, Somber, I mean, Turnstile before Somber, The Neighborhood.
Well, I mean, I
I
agree
don't know.
with I agree with Turnstile before Somber, but also,
Yeah.
Little Uzi Vert is the top ranked rapper on the lineup. There is no rap headliner this year, which is also slightly kind of interesting, I think, and
Yeah,
has not been the case in years past.
for sure. Like even last year had Tyler the Creator as a headliner, and yeah, the rap not as big of a presence this year for sure. And then even some of the rap that is on there is kind of legacy and indie,
There's some really good rap on there, though.
which is a less nice way to say what I just said. To say, right, like you've got Clips who are though on like every festival this year after they're having this huge success with the new album. Freddie Gibbs, who these festivals love, Little Sims,
Love
Jim.
Little Sims.
You've got you from the UK, Jim Legacy, who was on like every end of year list, and Fake Mink, also from the UK. Kendrick's not there, but Mustard is. Mona Leo, indie like pop rap collective Whatmore from New York City are on there. They just headlined Bowery Ballroom actually, so they're like a rising band here in New York who kind of get compared to Brockhampton, a little bit like Odd Future, that kind of collective vibe. They're on there. They're also on a lot of fests.
I also wonder if we would include under the rappers is Quadeca, who is this like impossible to categorize artist who does stuff in so many different genres, and I like don't know how to. So he's on there. That's interesting.
What other categories are you noticing on this lineup?
Another super interesting thing to me is that there's almost like a mini hyperpop adjacent festival happening within Lollapalooza this year. I think you could, depending on how the days break down and how the schedule breaks down, I think you could have like so much fun if you go like with Charlie XCX as your headliner, and then you also have like Frost Children, Okeloo, Nina Girachi, Slater, Snow Strippers, Horse Girl with two eyes and a capital L, not the Chicago indie rock band, the horse-headed DJ and producer. So she's not exactly hyperpop, but I'm just going to lump her in with this category right now because I think she could maybe be like adjacent. But yeah,
Yeah, if you wear a horse mask, automatic inclusion there. Uh,
exactly. And not only hyperpop, there's also a bunch of really fun like alt pop artists that I like a lot, like Hot and Freddie, Audrey Hobart, Muna, CMAT. So yeah, there's like some pop stuff beyond Tate McRae. No shade to Tate McRae. Headphones is a bop, but I like a little like art pop, alt pop in my life, in my festival.
I hear that. I want to go back to Horse Girl though. I actually don't know a lot about Horse Girl's genre. Again, to be clear, we're talking about the Horse Girl with two eyes. Horse Girl, the band, who is super confusing that two Horse Girls were happening at the same time.
It's very confusing.
It's not even like a historic thing. It's like these two horse girls literally happening at the same time, and both on the rise. Though and the horse girl with one eye, who's actually an indie rock band, not they're from Chicago, not on Lala this year. I'm sure they've played in the past.
I believe they played last year, yeah.
Yeah, so Horse Girl with two eyes, though, I don't know where she's from. She's, though,
I don't remember.
kind of blowing up, right? Like, this is
Yeah, yeah.
seeing her in it. What was the story with Sabrina Carpenter?
She arrested Horse Girl at, I think, the one of the South American festivals during the song where she arrests people, which, is escaping me right now, but there's a song in her set where Sabrina arrests people, and yeah, Horse Girl was the one, and Horse Girl has been on the rise in general. She's also playing Coachella. Yeah, I'm very, very intrigued.
And just horses in general are on the rise, right? Because
Totally.
you've got
It's always an animal, you know? It's either like bears, horses. Horses just happen to be the animal right now, I guess.
also on this lineup is a rising UK band called Wonder Horse, who we saw just announced a big show here in New York, too. Wonder Horse, I was checking out their videos. I know you said somebody called them the like UK's geese, but I assume that was after I listened. I have to say that's just maybe they're trying to say that this band has a lot of hype and are getting big very fast and that they play guitars, because I didn't like that comparison actually. When I watch Wonder Horse have this kind of like,
I didn't dig that comparison either.
they have this kind of the Clash / Bruce Springsteen vibe with this kind of real like Killers where we want to make it rock and roll on the radio vibe to them. That was my take on Wonder Horse.
Well, speaking of guitars, there are more guitar bands at Lolla. Um, you've got Hot Mulligan, Viagra Boys, The Story So Far, Die Spitz, High Viz, Chalk, all like kind of in the falling somewhat under the punk emo umbrella, I'd say. Um,
Punk, emo, yeah, post-punk,
yeah, yeah.
metalcore. Did you say Loathe?
Oh, I forgot to mention Loath. Good point.
Yeah, Loathe. That stands out as far as like a metal band. Anyway, I mean they also have not metal, but
Yeah, and then you have some good indie rock bands. You have Blood Orange, Ethel Cain, Wolf Alice, Wet Leg, Mama, Geese. Geese are actually playing along with the UK's Geese, Wonder Horse.
also not headlining. Geese. Just
True,
I'm
not
kidding,
quite
but yeah.
headlining.
But no, aren't Geese headline? Geese are on some of the smaller festivals. Geese have already
Yeah,
become
they're
a
already
headliner.
they have, yeah.
And how low down are Geese on this? It's
I think I wanna say they're, like, 3rd line. Do I
no, you're
remember that
right.
right?
They're third line right before Freddie Gibbs. But like, here's some people who are higher than Geese. Muna,
Muna
Clips.
are huge. Like,
That's
I cannot
crazy.
emphasize enough how huge Muna are. I've seen them play at All Things Go in front of a crowd of screaming people, and yeah, they're pretty huge.
Get Ethel Cain first on the second line. Wet Leg are two after Geese.
Interesting. I get
Anyway,
yeah, just that checks out, but yeah, definitely an interesting lineup. I don't think I'm gonna fly there to Chicago, although I love Chicago, but it's if I were in Chicago, I would definitely go.
oh yeah.
Very,
If I
very solid lineup.
Meanwhile, over in LA, another festival was announced. This year's Just Like Heaven, which you could now say, would you say this is the Indie Sleaze Fest?
I guess you could if you felt like using the term indie sleaze, which I have a bit of a a vendetta against, but it's okay. We can call
It's
it the indie sleaze fest.
This is one of those one day nostalgia fests that puts a ton of bands on, all that kind of make you nostalgic for a certain time period. This one co-headlined by the Strokes and LCD Sound System,
Yeah, it does
which
feel extra indie sleazy this year.
and you've got Chromeo, Feist, who I would not call indie sleaze, but fits right
No.
in there. Who else? Matt and Kim.
The Rapture,
The Rapture, definitely indie sleaze. Yeah. So
Tab
Tan
Lines.
Line, Twin Peaks, Whitney, and then they put some newer stuff on there. This is Lorelei stands out the most to me as, you know what this fest, we're spoiled in New York. We get like 500 LCD Sound System shows every single December. Um, the Strokes are, our hometown band. So I'm not immediately like, oh, wow, about this lineup, but it made me think I want to see a Feist. This is Lorelei show.
That would be so fun. Yeah, I would love that.
By the way, Boys Noise are on Lollapalooza, but Nine Inch Nails are not. Nine Inch Nails and Boys Noise
Yes, true.
will be playing together in Coachella in April, when we'll finally find out what Nine Inch Noise exactly is, if it's any different than Nine Inch Nails with Boys Noise, or if it's
And it's
just
also it's the last show Nine Inch Nails have booked right now.
okay. And it's time to make a clarification.
Yes.
There were there was much talk about something Trent Reznor said at a recent show where he said something about not touring anymore. We talked about it on this podcast. We also said on this podcast that we don't actually believe that's what he meant. And sure enough, it is not what he meant. He has clarified. To quote Trent Reznor, he says, as some of you may know, this is the last show of the tour. So he just said this at whatever the last show of the actual tour was.
It
And,
was Sacramento.
right. And to be clear, I think I said something the other day that got misconstrued into something that is not intentionally necessarily true. What I said was, this is the last show of the tour, and we don't have any shows booked, and we don't have any plans to book any shows anytime in the future so far. That doesn't mean we may not tour again. We may tour again. It won't be next month. It won't be this year. I never said we were intentionally stopping, and I never meant that. Anyway, he continued on, but we get the point. He wants to make it clear.
Also, when he continued on, he said that Nine Inch Nails were going to work on new music next, which is very exciting. He
Very exciting.
it's been previously said that they were going to, but this seems like even more evidence that hopefully we'll have some more new Nine Inch Nails music. So fingers crossed.
Meanwhile, Roots Picnic also just announced I think it's annual, right? Unless they're
Yeah.
usually every year, festival in Philadelphia. But they announced the initial lineup, one, of course, being the Roots on their own festival. But the other one, huge surprise to people, Jay-Z.
It's the Roots and Jay-Z performing together, actually.
Oh, is that
Yeah,
how it's billed?
it is.
Okay,
Yep.
I didn't.
They are one night's headliner. And that's
Okay.
what they've announced so far. And just as an aside, they also announced a new location in Philadelphia. It's at Belmont Plateau, which is like an early place of importance for Philly hip hop that Will Smith name drops in his song Summertime. So anyway, going back to Jay-Z.
Yes, and what people also noticed was that Jay-Z's name had an umlaut, the 2 dots over the Y, which is exactly how it looks on Reasonable Doubt, his classic 30-year-old album. So we had about 24 hours to wonder, is Jay-Z gonna be playing a Reasonable Doubt set? They didn't make that clear. They didn't say anything about his set. But just one day later, sure enough, he announced 2 more shows, 2 giant Yankee Stadium shows. They don't explicitly say he will be playing the albums, but they do say that these 2 shows will be celebrating Reasonable Doubt, which is turning 30, and The Blueprint turning 25. And one of the shows is listed as has like a 30 next to it, and one of the shows has a 25 next to it. So they're kind of you could guess maybe he's playing Reasonable Doubt one night and The Blueprint the next night. Which already stresses me out because
Yeah, I've already seen it reported that he's playing the albums in full. I personally do not feel comfortable committing to that. I feel like based on the information we have, which is just like this social media post from Rock Nation, I I I feel like it's likely, but I will not commit to that yet.
and yeah, sometimes we've seen this a million times. Sometimes they're vague and they definitely play the album. Sometimes they say they're playing the album and they don't even fully play it in order or just leave certain parts out or yeah, so
Listen, we're all about making sure you don't have fake news. That's really what it comes down to. So
yes.
we wanna be sure before we commit to it.
But so it stresses me out a little bit when things get announced like this because 2 nights is like realistically, I'm not making it to Yankee Stadium 2 nights in a row. So I'm already like, oh, the shows are gonna be different. I gotta go both. Anyway, I'll probably choose Reasonable Doubt if I go to just one. But
Right.
and let's see. I don't know they're not even on sale yet. For all we know,
Not even on sale yet, and
more
they
might
haven't
be added.
revealed as we record this on Thursday afternoon, they haven't revealed ticket information. So, I'm assuming we'll get it soon. It seems likely.
Maybe,
But the other
maybe.
thing is oh, go ahead, Dave.
I'm just saying maybe by next week we'll have 30 nights as well. So you never know.
Well, I do think that these are not the first pairs of Yankee Stadium shows that Jay-Z has done. I think he's twice before done a pair of Yankee Stadium shows, so it seems very likely that this will remain 2 if the past is any, evidence. Because in 2010, he played the first ever shows at Yankee Stadium with Eminem, and he had, like, this crazy lineup of guests for each night. He brought out Beyoncé each night, his wife, Drake each night, Kanye West each night. And night 1 also had Swizz Beatz, Coldplay's Chris Martin. Night 2 also had Nicki Minaj. Actually, Swizz Beatz was both nights too, I'm sorry. And but night 2 also had Mary J. Blige. And then in 2013, he played 2 nights with Justin Timberlake, and he brought out Alicia Keys on night 1. So, yeah, I wonder what guests he's going to get we're going to get this time.
Very, very good point.
And Eminem features on The Blueprint, so, big question mark, might we get him as a guest at one of these shows? At the Blueprint show?
Do you think John K. Samson could be a guest at one of these shows?
I mean, that would be a dream for me.
we're totally switching gears here for a second. We're about to talk about John K. Samson, aka John Samson Fellows, aka the frontman of a band we love dearly called the Weakerthans, who have been have not been a band for a while, and John K. Samson also not really playing music for a while. And this kind of topic came back to us because of a new article written by Montreal writer Luke Ottenhoff at a publication called Has Lit, and I think lit implies literature. But this is, an article about a man whose lyrics are literature and poetry. And I don't know, Amanda, correct me if I'm getting any of this wrong, but also, Amanda, I just want to thank you for suggesting this topic
I
because
mean, there's almost nothing. Maybe cats are the only thing I love talking about more than the Weakerthans. So I mean,
and
one of my all-time favorite bands for sure.
the Weakerthans also talk about cats, so it makes sense. But
Exactly. So it's
the,
perfect.
why I really want to thank you is because it meant in the past 24 hours, I actually went back and listened to every Weakerthans album and some of
Amazing.
John's solo material. And that I just, nothing makes me happier than
It
listening to the
still holds
Weakerthans.
up, right?
One of the best damn bands of all time. So,
Exactly. I'll never forget the first time I heard the Weakerthans. It was in volume 4 of Hopeless Records' Hopelessly Devoted to You compilation, which had Past Due and The Side on it. It came out in 2002, and I feel like that just, like, changed the course of my life.
oh, that's amazing. And I don't remember the first time I heard the Weakerthans, but let's step back a little and talk about who the Weakerthans are. John Samson, the frontman, was actually the bassist and co-vocalist of Canadian political punks Propaganda in the early 90s. He was on their first two albums, and actually he released his first solo album the same year Propaganda released their first album. So he was already also, doing a singer-songwriter thing on the side. He then left Propaganda. They're still a band. They came out with an album last year, I think. I mean, I'm almost positive. I just can't remember if it was like last year or the year before, but he hasn't been in that band for a very long time. When he left Propaganda, he formed a less punk, kind of more indie rock band called the Weakerthans. They're folkier, super catchy, energizing music. I've seen them called folk punk. I don't think of that, but as what they are. And this band has a huge emphasis on amazing lyrics that
Yes.
John writes and the somewhat nasally voice of John Samson. So this is a band you might be thinking that reminds me of the Mountain Goats, right? That's a
And you would be correct.
but you could compare the Weakerthans to so many bands. I made a list: Mountain Goats, Built to Spill, Shins, Death Cab for Cutie, Modest Mouse, even New Pornographers, The Hold Steady, especially because of the frontman vocals. Also, you could call the Weakerthans emo adjacent. You can compare them to the
Definitely.
Get Up Kids, Dashboard Confessional, who I know they played a lot of shows with Dashboard back in the day. Do you have anything else to add to that list?
No, I think you covered it. It's also for me, it's hard to compare. I mean, the Mountain Goats is a natural point of comparison, but it's hard for me to compare them because it's all about the lyrics for me, and nobody's out there writing lyrics like John K. Samson. So
Yeah,
they're in their own league.
and for people like me who it's not all about the lyrics, the Weakerthans are one of those bands where I know every word. You can't not know every
Definitely,
word. So
definitely.
the lyrics really add to this band, but I don't want to scare away people or that this is just about the lyrics. Their music, like I said, is super catchy, just infectious, just everyone's going crazy. We miss the Weakerthans so much. We both luckily got a chance to see them live a lot
Yes.
of times. So their first album was 1997's Fallow, and they then released Left and Leaving in 2000, and then Reconstruction Site in 2003, which was also their first for the label Epitaph.
And I think if you're gonna start with anywhere with the Weakerthans, it has to be one of those 2 albums, Left and Leaving or Reconstruction Site.
I
I have a hard
agree.
time choosing which one is my favorite. They're both my favorite.
Agreed. Left and Leaving and Reconstruction Site, definitely the two best. But, so like I said, I went back and listened to all the albums. The Fallow, definitely a lot more lo-fi.
Yeah.
Still, I was reminded I know every single song on that album, and it is also so good. And I don't want to diss anything the Weakerthans did, but
No, no.
their final album, 2000 Reunion Tour, I realized listening to that, I was like, yeah, I don't know this one as much for whatever
But I'm
reason.
sure you know at least some of the songs, like Sun in an Empty Room is an all-timer.
Yes, and I think that might be that's actually their most streamed song on Spotify, I think I
That
noticed.
that checks out.
But yeah, that album is still good, but it's not. I'm listening to the other 3. I don't know if it was when that album came out, I was a little checked out on. I don't know what it was, but anyway, I'm ranking that one 4th. Get Addicted to Left and Leaving and Reconstruction Site, and then Fallow will be a huge treat, and you will hear the
Yes.
beginnings, but with equally catchy and amazing songs that I could picture everyone being played live too. So definitely a lot of set staples. Hopefully we get to see them another set. When was the first time you saw the Weakerthans live? Do you remember?
First time I saw them was 2009 at Music Hall of Williamsburg, and then I
So
saw
that was,
them.
2 years after Reunion Tour.
Yeah, yeah, and then I saw them again in 2011. They did a 4-night run at Bowery Ballroom where they played one of their albums in full on each night, and I went to the Left and Leaving night. I definitely wanted to go to the reconstruction night too, but I couldn't do like the back-to-back nights, especially at that point. I was still living in New Jersey, and I just was like, I can't do the commute 2 nights in a row. But man, I really wish I had. And then I saw John K. Samson do a set in 2017 that he played a lot of Weakerthans material, and also solo material. But those 2011 New York City shows were their final shows in the US. And then they did like a few Canadian shows after that, in 2013.
Right.
Yeah,
So it's been 13 years since they played it all, and even longer since they played the US and New York. Though has it really been 15 years?
I can't.
Am I doing the math right?
I think you are. Well, when did you first see them?
I first saw them in 2003. I
Nice.
went I went 2 nights in a row actually at 2 different clubs that no longer exist. They were on tour with One Line Drawing, aka Jonah Matranga of Far, who I was also a big fan of at the time. And amazingly, this is bragging rights that I went to both of these shows. Motion City Soundtrack were the first of 3 on this tour. I didn't know that.
Amazing.
I didn't know them yet. I got hooked on them from these shows, from preparing for these shows, and got there early to see them both shows. The first one was on June 3rd, 2003 at Maxwell's in Hoboken, New Jersey. Legendary, beloved indie, venue that is
Yes,
no
very
longer with
missed.
us. And then one night later, June 4th, 2003, in Park Slope, Brooklyn at Southpaw, which is also a venue I saw a million shows at and loved. Not quite as, no offense, Southpaw, not quite as legendary as Maxwell's, but um, another great New York City venue that is missed. And so that was great seeing them both. That would have been the Reconstruction Site tour. I also went on to see them a few more times at least. I know I saw them at Bowery Ballroom. I think I was at least one of those 2011 final shows. I can't remember which year I saw them at Bowery Ballroom, but I did. Oh, well, no, sorry. I definitely also saw them 1 year after those 2003 shows. They came back to Bowery Ballroom in September 2004. And one way I know I was definitely there is because pictures I took of that show are on brooklynvegan.com, along with my very short review, which just said, I love the Weakerthans. Show was awesome. That
I
was my
mean, what
whole
more
review.
needs to be said, really? That
Also,
that covers it.
so classic me for I would get home from a show. This is before cell phones. So I've got my photos on my camera. I'm transferring them to my computer. I'm doing whatever edits, uploading them, putting them on the blog. There's no social media to see pictures anywhere else. I got my pictures up. I'm excited. I write my 7-word review and I go to sleep. That was actually a month after Brooklyn Vegan started. I can't even claim to have had like, sort of set version of posts yet at that point. But there, yeah, so Weakerthans, early BV band. Definitely went on to see them at Bowery Ballroom at least one other time through the years. Now you know a bunch about the Weakerthans, but now there's this new article that's kind of revisiting where John has been for the past 10 years or so. Or we should
Yeah.
point out that he released 2 solo albums
Yes.
after the Weakerthans
Which are
became
also
inactive.
great, which are great.
So here's a quote from that article. I think one of the solo albums came out in 2012 and 2016. In the article, they say as the 2000s pressed on, Samson Fellows, his last name, he took the last name of his wife. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, it
Samson
is.
Samson Fellows continued making music amid some major life changes. He quit drinking and converted to Quakerism.
And the article goes on to say that he started to feel anxious and depressed while working on his second solo album. So, and yeah, it's definitely a bummer to hear that he struggled with his mental health while being beloved by so many people. But I guess that is just how it is sometimes. But so I think that is really ultimately the reason that he is stepping away from making music in the way that he was. He's still the article says that he still does some musical practices kind of in a group setting, like in a non-recorded group setting, but also that he's gotten into weaving. That is like a big creative practice for him now.
Yeah, so instead of giving the world songs, he has substituted that with weaving whatever you make from weaving and giving away to various people his creations. It's sad reading the article. He says he got really depressed. He was hospitalized. He has a lot of anxiety about playing now. He admitted that he came to the realization in therapy that negative feedback, maybe people not liking his newer albums as much as they like the Weakerthans, or him not liking his old songs as much, all these things are like weighing on him, like
Yeah.
ego issues, feeling like people are hating this, or I'm getting less popular. I'm putting words in his mouth, but that kind of vibe of it really became hard to deal with. And so he just stopped all of it.
Yeah, and he did a few solo shows in Winnipeg last year, and he said those were really hard for him to do too. So, I as much as I would love, another Weaker Thans tour, I don't want I don't want John to put himself through that, put himself through hell. So, I feel like I'm just so grateful for the times that I have seen them live and I've seen him live and for the albums that we have. So I feel like all I can do is just be grateful for that and just hope that he stays well as much as possible. But having said that, I wouldn't say no, no. I mean,
Yeah, definitely would, John, if you can make it happen, Weaker Than's reunion tour, it'd be huge. I was thinking that could be a
but
headliner at Best Friends Forever. That could
I
be,
literally, I think I literally, that was like literally what I thought of when Best Friends Forever was asking for suggestions. But now I feel kind of bad for suggesting it, knowing
yeah.
that, but I would like it. So
Go read that article on the website publication called Has Lit for more
yeah,
on John's struggle with those solo shows in 2025. If reading it, I couldn't remember if they actually happened, and I thought maybe he was going to say canceled the night before. But yeah,
no, they
he went
happened.
through with it. It was, yeah, no, then he goes on, the article goes on talking about how they happened and how he then stood at the door each night and talked to every single attendee as they left.
You know what?
And
That checks out because when I saw him in 2017, I went and bought a cat-themed shirt at the merch table, which his wife, Christine Fellows, was working, and I also got to say hi to him, which is, like, not something I'm always super into doing. I'm pretty shy, but I did just, like, thank him for the music and for everything. So I'm like, "Yeah, that checks out that he did that." I could see it.
it's special.
So, yeah, listen to The Weaker Thans if you haven't already and his solo work. That's the other big takeaway here.
Meanwhile, we do not have new Weakerthans, but we do have new Death Cab.
Yeah.
Death Cab for Cutie have announced a new album, also coming on Epitaph/Anti. It's actually coming on
It's coming on Anti.
Anti, which is the sister label of Epitaph, and which I think the last Weakerthans album may have been like a co-release between Epitaph and Anti. Anyway, they're
Gotta look it up.
basically the same label.
And it's Death Cab's first album off of a major label, Atlantic, in
In a while.
20 years and
Right.
six albums. It's called I Built You a Tower, and the first single is Riptides. It's really good. The album was produced by John Congleton.
Always excited to have
excited.
Death Cab. We can't say Death Cab has been inactive. If anything, Death Cab has been bigger than ever,
No, I
including
mean, including opening for My Chemical Romance in New Jersey, including their lots of touring, one tour for the Transatlanticism anniversary. And then Gibbard was doing Postal Service tour. And then
with
also,
Death Cab, right?
so
It was
yeah,
Death Cab and
it
Postal
was,
Service
yeah,
sets.
it was
Like
Death Cab doing Transatlanticism and the Postal Service doing Give Up. And
playing
so
playing
actually,
arenas in the
y-
process.
yeah. And so according to the press material on the album, kind of like this album's genesis kind of came during that time when he kind of felt like his life was falling apart. He's going through a divorce and wrote this album. So
And by divorce, are we talking about Zoe Deschanel?
I don't think so. I think it's someone else, but I'm not positive. I can never keep up with who's married to who.
Okay. Oh, and we have a variant of that new Death Cab album in our shop, shop.brooklynvegan.com. Go pick that up. Now let's talk albums out this week, starting with, surprise, Bill is going to hop on to talk about the albums he reviewed in Indie Basement. So, all right, ready? Let's invite on Bill.
All right. Well, it was kind of a slow week this week in Indie Basement. Only 3 new reviews. First of which, and my album of the week, is Ladytron's Paradises. This is Ladytron's 8th album, as well as their longest at 16 songs and 73 minutes. The band are kind of known for like that icy synth style that they've been doing for like 25 years, but they kind of warm up on this one, playing around with a few 90s sounds, including like baggy Manchester beats and acid house. It's their most dance music forward album to date, and they're clearly having fun here. Melodically, it's the same Ladytron, but it's like they're playing with a whole new box of crayons. Is it too long? Well, probably, but it's also really good. And it's their party, so who am I to say when they should go to bed? The other main album I'm reviewing this week, there's a new one from OC's frontman John Dwyer. He has a solo project called Damaged Bug, and this is his first one of those in 6 years, and it's called Zuzax. With Damaged Bug, John puts down the guitars and he picks up synthesizers, but there's still a lot of organic instruments like bass and real drums. You get a hodgepodge of styles with this one. There's 60s party rock, can-style krautrock, and even a couple songs that you could sneak into a trip-hop set, though he would probably not want me saying that there was something called trip-hop on his album. Also, some of John's most overtly pop songs to date, including the song that opens the record, End of the War, which is a duet with one-time OC's bandmate Bridget Dawson. It's a cool record. And the last new record I review this week is Anna Calvi's EP that's called Is This All There Is? Now, if you don't know, Anna Calvi is a musical polymath, composer, and guitar shredder with a knockout set of pipes. She scored 2 seasons of Peaky Blinders and collaborated with the late great avant-garde theater director and choreographer Robert Wilson on 2017 stage production The Sandman. Now, this EP is the first of 3 releases that I'm quoting here from the press release. Explore identity as metamorphosis, shaped and reshaped through the experience of falling in love. All 4 songs are duets, and they're with Iggy Pop, Perfume Genius, Laurie Anderson, and the National's Matt Berninger. The standouts are the Iggy duet, God's Lonely Man, where she actually gets him to sing. He shows up on a lot of people's records these days, but he does a lot of sort of gravelly talking through them. This one, he's actually singing and holding his own against Anna, or maybe it's the other way around. Anna has always been compared to Susie Sue. So in some ways, this is kind of like taking Iggy's The Passenger and Susie and the Banshees cover of The Passenger and mixing it into one totally new glammy song. It's awesome. The other standout is the EP's title track, which is the duet with Matt Berninger. Anna's voice will blow your hair back, and it's got this spaghetti western vibe with a galloping rhythm that almost sounds like the two of them riding off together across the horizon.
It's truly so gorgeous. I'm like obsessed with that song.
Yeah, it's
I
really
am
cool.
I'm definitely excited to hear this EP. Love Anna. Love all the guests she got on this album.
Yeah. The two other songs that are in the middle of the EP are both covers. The Anna and Perfume Genius song is a cover of Bonnie Prince Billy's I See a Darkness, which is excellent. And the other one is the Laurie Anderson collab, which is their take on Kraftwerk's Computer Love, which is cool, but compared to the other three songs, it's just not quite at that level. I'm anxious to hear what the other two, I guess, EPs are going to be. And if you need something else to listen to, I still think her 2010 self-titled debut is my favorite of her full-length albums to date. And that's what Indie Basement is this week.
Thanks for popping on, Bill.
Of course.
You know what?
What?
We also have another surprise guest coming right now in the form of pre-recorded top 5 albums of the week from Andrew. It's his segment of notable releases. So let's give the mic to Andrew.
Hey, what's up? This is Andrew from Brooklyn Vegan, and I've got 5 new albums out this week that you need to hear, starting with the first Poison the Well album in 17 years, Peace and Place. Poison the Well started out by pioneering melodic metalcore as we now know it with their 1999 debut album, The Opposite of December, but they since went in all kinds of different directions. They went towards heavier metalcore, went towards more post-hardcore kind of stuff, and their later records were a lot more experimental, a lot more out there. They broke up, they're back, and now they got this new album that really kind of touches on everything they've ever done and then some. It really drives home the point that this is a band like no other. Whatever pigeonholed subgenre you try to fit them into, they don't fit. This album is really not like anything else, and it's honestly amazing how good it is given the 17-year gap since they last released music. Also out this week, Gladdy, who are a reliably great indie punk band led by Augusta Koch, formerly of Cayetana, and who also has a new band with Marissa from Screaming Females, are back with their new album, No Need to Be Lonely. It was produced by Jeff Rosenstock. If you love ragged, gritty, catchy, emotional indie punk, you cannot go wrong with Gladdy, and this new album is no exception. Augusta's voice sounds incredible, as it always does. Check this one out. The Silver, this metal band with members of Horrendous and Crypt Sermon, are back with their second record, Looking Glass Hymnal Blue. They previewed this record with a 9-minute single called Two Candles, a song that touched on everything from black metal to prog to post-rock, maybe even a little screamo, a lot there. And when you're introducing an album with a song that epic, I think, you know, we kind of start to expect, okay, this album's going to take us on a real trip, and this one does. Also out this week, Avalon Emerson and the Charms, Written into Changes. Avalon Emerson kind of got her start more in the DJ world, but with her band The Charms, she does more of like a catchy synth pop kind of songwritery forward thing, and it's super, super cool to hear her do this kind of stuff. One of the co-producers on the album was Rostam, formerly of Vampire Weekend, but these are just great, catchy, like alternative pop songs, and, you know, a lot different from her DJ stuff, and I really like both, so it's very cool that we do get both. Last out this week, last for now, there's a lot of others, but the last one I'm going to mention is Chicago band Football Head's sophomore album, Way to the Truth. This band pretty much combines emo, grunge, various other forms of radio rock from the late 90s and early 2000s. They unabashedly cite Chevelle, for example, but they're also very much of the DIY emo scene, and they just tie it all together in a way that if you like rock music that you could have heard on, you know, K-Rock or MTV2 Rock Countdown or Fuse or whatever, you know, between, say, 94 and 03, but you want a fresh twist on it, don't miss out on Football Head.
Thanks, Andrew. Miss you. Also, so Andrew just mentioned that the new Silver album came out, which reminds me, I wanted to highlight 2 more under the radar metal albums that came out earlier this year that we haven't mentioned on this show before, really quick. As Andrew said, the Silver feature members of Philly's Horrendous. Horrendous are one of the best progressive death metal bands of the past 10 to 15 years, in the club with other greats like Toronto's Tomb Mold and Denver's Blood Incantation. the latter of whom especially integrates cosmic and psychedelic sounds alongside their death growls. There was also this short-lived Swedish band called Morbus Chron. Back before Blood Incantation had even released anything, Morbus Chron released a modern landmark album in the genre called Sweven. Sorry in advance if I'm mispronouncing any of these Swedish bands or words, but Morbus Chron released this album in 2014 called Sweven, which was arguably an influence on all of the great psychedelic death metal records we got for the 10 years that followed. But Morbus Chron themselves didn't really stick around that long to be part of the fun, breaking up in 2015. Meanwhile, Morbus Chron members have gone on to various other projects, including in 2020 when Morbus Chron frontman Robert Anderson returned with a new band called Sweven, named after the 2014 album. It's a little confusing. So you've got Sweven, the album, and then the frontman returns now with Sweven, the band. Sweven, meanwhile, again, I don't even know if it's pronounced, if I'm saying it properly. Maybe it's Sweven, Sweven. They just released one album, so far anyway, called The Eternal Resonance, which gave us more of that psychedelic death metal sound. But it didn't get a lot of attention, relatively speaking anyway, and they've been quiet since. Now, I recently realized that on February 27th, 2026, we actually got 2 new Morbus Chron related records. The first, again, hopefully I'm pronouncing this right, is by Swedish band Speglas, Speglas, whose drummer and vocalist were both in Sweven with Robert Anderson, and whose vocalist also played guitar briefly in Morbus Chron. Speglas have actually been a band since 2015, but after just 2 EPs in 11 years, this is their first full length. And this might be the first metal record I've heard so far this year that's scratching that Swedish progressive death metal itch, which last year I would say was best represented by that Ancient Death record. The Speglas album is called Endarkenment, Being, and Death, and it was mixed by Simon Soderberg, who used to play in Swedish rock giants Ghost, and mastered by Magnus Lindberg of Swedish post-metal greats Cult of Luna. So you got the whole Swedish scene here. Meanwhile, released on the same day is the debut full-length by Swedish death metal band Harrowed, whose vocalist and drummer Adam Lindmark played both bass and drums in Morbus Chron, and whose bassist and guitarist Tobias also recently played as a live member of Tribulation, another Swedish death metal band who I had to work in a mention of somehow before this segment ended, and who put out some of my favorite albums in the genre in the past 15 years. The Harrowed album, unlike the more progressive-leaning Speglas one, is a more straightforward Swedish death metal album, but also a great listen and now in heavy rotation. So there you have it. Go check out the Harrowed and Speglas albums. Came out on February 27th. Amanda, I'm going to give it to you to quickly finish the other 3 albums and notable releases this week. What do we got?
Yeah, so this week we talk about pop artist Grace Ives' 3rd album, Girlfriend, New York screamo band Alt's surprise release O, and Witch Post, the duo of Alaska Raid and Dylan Frazier, their new EP Butterfly.
All right. Real quick, 2 songs, announcements that we forgot to mention last week. 2 of our favorite hardcore adjacent bands both released new songs last week. First, we've got Odelay with Figurine, their first single since their fantastic 2024 album Deep Sage. Also their first single for great label Run for Cover. And still on Pure Noise, a new song by Drug Church called Pinch. They haven't announced a new album yet, but they definitely, I think they did say it was going to be a first taste of it. So looking forward to hearing more from Drug Church. The new first song absolutely rips. Odelay also always rip. So go check out the two new
awesome songs for sure.
Yes. All right. Let's do the news and get out of here. At 90, actually, we're not getting out of here. Stick around after the news because our new segment on 1996 albums is coming. At 92 years young, Willie Nelson has announced his 79th solo album. Also, his 156th album overall. That's
so
crazy.
Prolific.
It's called Dream Chaser and includes a co-writing credit with his recent tour mate, Bob Dylan. The band Thursday, who will be out on tour for all of April, by the way, have covered Four Non Blondes' 90s radio staple What's Up as a challenge for music lesson app Musora's cover series. Go watch that. The Breeders, who, like Smashing Pumpkins, played Lollapalooza in 1994, have announced a summer 2026 tour. Passion Pit have also announced a summer tour and are preparing a new EP, which means new music this year from both Foxtrot and Passion Pit, which is maybe a sentence that only makes sense to me. But yeah, Public Image Limited have announced the This Is Not the Final Pill tour and a live album. Dinosaur Jr. will be playing Where You Been, and Band of Horses will be playing Everything All the Time on a tour together this year. Bill talked to the band Memorials, who feature Electrolane's Verity Sussman and Wire's Matthew Sims on the new episode of the BV Interviews podcast. Go check that other Brooklyn Vegan podcast out. We talked a lot about polka dotted math rock duo Engine de Poutrine, who I will never say properly, on last week's episode of BV Weekly. They have since announced their first U.S. tour, which includes the 2 sold-out New York City shows that we talked a lot about with Mikey last week. If you didn't hear last week's episode where we talked a lot about this band, go listen to that. Hellfest New Jersey has announced its 2026 lineup and a new location. Last year, which was the first year back for the legendary fest, was in East Rutherford, New Jersey. But this year, it's at the Dome at Adventure Crossing in Jackson, New Jersey, which is like way down the shore, meaning as a Brooklynite, my chances of getting there again this year have gone down. But I'll definitely try to be there. The lineup, again, is really fun with headliners Hatebreed, Glassjaw, VOD, so many more. Go check that Hellfest lineup out. Veeps will be streaming Go-Go Bordello show from Union Transfer in Philadelphia on March 24th. You can watch that on veeps.com. And Pearl Jam's Mike McCready, we didn't mention this last week, announced a new graphic novel and rock opera called Farewell to Seasons. The story is based around the Seattle music scene of the 90s, and the deluxe edition of this comic graphic novel comes with a vinyl of the rock opera, which we happen to have an exclusive color vinyl variant of in our shop. So go visit shop.brooklynvegan.com for that exclusive and much more. And now it's time for our new series, which we look back at some of our favorite 1996 albums. Andrew, Bill, and I talked about 2 albums this week. So without further ado, Bill, take it away.
Today launches a special project we're doing on BV Weekly where we are looking back at some of the most important and best albums of 1996, given that that's 30 years ago. And we thought we might start with talking to Dave and Andrew about where we were at the time. I'll speak for myself. 1996 was the first year that I lived in New York City. I moved here summer of 95. So really, I was just sort of getting my feet in 1996. And at the time, I was producing a syndicated college radio show called Music View that nobody remembers, but our offices were at Broadway and Bleecker, and I was living in the very cool neighborhood of Murray Hill on 3rd Avenue and 27th Street, and I would walk home from work every day, and Other Music, a very famous record store in New York City, which is no longer here, had just opened in the fall of 1995, and I stopped there almost every day, and so 96, me living here and Other Music and just the general like wide open world of New York is all very part of my taste at the time. So it all runs together for me. Dave, what about you? Where were you in 1996?
Well, not too far from you, actually, because I was in college at the time and I lived in the suburbs of New York City, close enough to get here as often as possible, and which I did. I was very involved, very into New York City nightlife and music at the time. But yeah, like I said, it was college. It was kind of all college and partying and concerts. I will say, I feel like important context that I kind of was thinking about while we were creating this segment is back then I was not like the music nerd that I am now. So I think what's interesting is I've been obsessed with music since I was super young. That was like consistent. But the way I see it now is very completist and can't miss any shows. And I'm into every single band. You know, I'm into more bands than I'm not. Back then, like Bjork was my favorite artist at the moment. I mainly only cared about Bjork. It's hard to put into words exactly now, but like Now I'm like, Bjork is part of this scene and these 20 related artists, and I care about them all. At the time, before the internet was really popping, I could just be hyper focused on what I knew and wasn't always like looking for the other thing.
And what you could afford to buy, because you didn't have Spotify or whatever. So
It's also true. And I think as we talk through some of these albums, I'll put it in the context of, well, I had the CD, I had this cassette, or somebody burned this for me. Or, well, no, maybe even burning wasn't a thing yet. Somebody copied this cassette for me, whatever it was. So I think that is a lot of context. And some of these albums that we'll talk about, I don't want to give any spoilers, but some of these albums we talk about, I was very much into at the time. Some I was into just because, of course, I was into them. I don't know how else to explain it. Like everyone was listening to them. Some I was very into. Some I got really into 20 years later. You know, there's all that. So like sometimes you were there, but weren't there.
This episode is going to spark the CD revival that we've all been waiting for. I'm personally excited for the CD revival because I still have my whole collection. I'm very proud of it, and I want it to mean something the way like my dad's record collection did, like because he hung on to it when all his peers sold theirs.
do you have a shelving situation set up?
Oh yeah. So in 1996, I was in kindergarten, which means that my perspective on this music is a lot different than both of yours. But I think that's cool. I think it's great to have the various perspectives. Of the albums I'll talk about, some of them I bought on CD not long after they came out. You know, in 1996, my CD collection probably had like the first Beatles record, Aqua, Backstreet Boys, stuff like that. You know, it wasn't what it is, you know, but like a few years later, I like found punk and alternative rock and everything. And I started buying up a lot of this stuff from the 90s. To Dave's point, sometimes you weren't there, but you were there. I feel that way about a lot of the 90s. Like I first heard like new alternative rock in real time probably in 1997. I would look to like Everclear's So Much for the Afterglow as something I knew about when it first came out and kind of like pushing me in that direction. And then 2 years later is when Blink-182 released Enema of the State, and then the rest is history for me. So like I kind of caught some of these 90s records a few years later, but I still felt like I was part of the thing that was happening at the time. And you know, whether it came out, if I bought it in 2001 and it came out in 96, it still sort of felt like it was mine, especially compared to the Beatles. And so, and then like Dave said, a lot of this stuff is stuff I got into 20 years later. It's like the albums that I'm most excited to talk about vary between, some were among the first CDs I ever purchased, and some were albums I learned about long after they were considered super important and the internet told me to check them out. So I tried to keep the list that I'm gonna focus on kind of mixed up between like those personal favorites that were with me my whole life, and then just like stuff that, you know, I only got into maybe in the past few years. So it's a lot of life on this list.
Andrew and Bill each chose a bunch of albums to highlight. I'm going to go along for the ride. Andrew, why don't we go with your first pick, which is Texas is the Reasons. Do You Know Who You Are?
Big shocker to everyone that I'm starting with some emo. 1996 was actually an incredible year for emo. We have a whole list on Brooklyn Vegan of, I think, 18 emo albums from this year. The list is insane. We could have done a whole episode just on emo from 1996, but I'm only going to pick 2 emo records. I tried to also mix it up between genre and then within genre, tried to at least have the other emo record is kind of coming from a much different place geographically and musically. But Texas is the Reasons, Do You Know Who You Are is the blueprint for so much music I love. Like I just kind of said, I mean, I started kind of getting into the greater punk world in the early 2000s. So I kind of found an introduction through the early 2000s, New Jersey and Long Island emo stuff like Thursday and Taking Back Sunday and those kinds of bands. And Texas the Reasons' only record, Do You Know Who You Are, was the blueprint for all of that. Fast forward a few years, it's the blueprint for Title Fight. Fast forward more years, it's the blueprint for Anxious and One Step Closer and Koyo. All these bands that were making melodic emo, but coming directly from hardcore, especially like East Coast and or New York hardcore. It all dates back to Texas the Reason, who were a band of New York hardcore musicians. They were on Revelation Records, and they made a record that musically had a lot of shared DNA with the stuff we now call Midwest emo, although they were very much not from the Midwest. This album, I think, is so far ahead of its time. I mean, like I said, it influenced generation after generation of other bands, but some of the 90s emo stuff, the charm is like how 90s it sounds. This is one of those albums that like it would have gotten big if it came out in 2002, would have gotten big if it came out in 2012. It's just like a fantastic, catchy, hard-hitting rock record. Really no other band like it, especially not from the New York hardcore scene. They were for sure the most emo of the New York hardcore scene bands. And yeah, this is an album that, again, I found this one kind of after already knowing it was important. I found it because a lot of the bands I loved would talk about it in interviews and stuff. So there was some level of like, I approached it kind of knowing like, okay, this is a big one. This is where a lot of stuff I love begins. And then over time, it went from an album that I knew was important and influential to just an album that I loved right alongside all the bands that told me about it. So it just feels like an album you can grow with and that can like become yours, even when you approach it sort of like already realizing it's canon. You know what I kind of mean? That difference between like, this is mine versus like, I inherited this knowledge that I should like this kind of thing.
Definitely. I mean, this is an album, I agree, if it came out in 2026, it's still amazing. I've been spending so much time with this album lately because they reunited in 2025, and I did get a chance to see them at Best Friends Forever Fest and before this episode. And this album just continues to feel amazing. Like a lot of these albums, I think, I've been doing a lot of 1996 listening, and you just have this thought of, why am I listening to new music? There's so much good albums from 1996, but this is another example for me of something where I was like there, but not there. Because like you say, they came out of New York City hardcore and members were in hardcore bands. I knew those hardcore bands. I definitely, like, Texas is a Reason was off my radar. When they formed, I wasn't paying attention to whatever scene at that time. And this is another thing I think about myself through the years is like, I'm just as much into hardcore now as I was in high school, but that wasn't like consistently necessarily true throughout the years, especially when I was younger. I was jumping from subculture to subculture, which makes sense because then if you read Brooklyn Vegan, you know it's kind of this mishmash of everything. And that's has a lot to do with all the different experiences I had, kind of being like, oh, wait, now I like this genre and this genre and this genre, but I still like the other one. Anyway, I wasn't paying attention to what Texas was doing in real time. And then they didn't actually last that long. They were only a band from 1994 to 1997. They reunited briefly in like 2006 and 2012, 2016. Then, much to many's surprise, they came back in 2025 again, although without Norman Brannon this time.
Who now is in Thursday, full circle.
Yes, which is a band who I did love a lot more in real time. All I'm saying is, I agree, very special record. And, I'm way more into emo now than I was, actually, also partially due to Andrew's influence.
Sorry.
I've attended the Best Friends Forever Fest at only 2 years it existed. Unfortunately, it took this year off. And it's been great, like getting a chance to see Texas is the Reason, Sunny Day Real Estate, Mineral, all on these same shows.
I'll just chime in and say the emo scene passed me by. Like, I didn't even know that emo was a thing until probably 1997. I was very into Britpop and a lot of like sort of down-tempo, trip-hoppy stuff, which will come up on this list at some point. And I just did not know this existed at the time. And it hasn't been until the last 10 years that I've, become aware of like what a huge part of like music this was. And it continues to be.
So even living in New York, Texas is the Reason in particular, like you had never kind of seen them on flyers or anything?
Maybe. I'm sure I did. I'm sure I saw it in the middle of like the Village Voice, which some people bought it for the apartments and some people like me bought it so you could see all the new shows that were getting announced in their ads in the paper. But yeah, I was more into like Suede and the Britpop stuff, and there wasn't much of a New York like indie rock scene going on outside of like Soul Coughing and John Spencer Blues Explosion, and even they are like, you know, from a different era almost. So I think the mid '90s were like not the greatest time for New York indie rock, and my attention went across the pond. And so yeah, I missed punk, and like that was just not what I was into at the time.
It's a relatable point is, like I said earlier, you could be there but not be there. Yeah, if I opened the Village Voice, I was looking to see if Bjork was playing somewhere. It doesn't mean that I was necessarily paying attention to that other band that was listed right underneath. You do look back at those ads now and you're like, wait, I went to that club on Monday and Thursday, but didn't go to Nirvana on Wednesday. Like, what was wrong with me? You know, you just skipped over these key shows. Yeah, you do kind of look back and see what you missed. I was also going to say, when Brooklyn Vegan started in 2004, emo was very much a bad word to me. And I think now we look back and say, well, that was because of the Hot Topic bands, the mall emo, the whatever generation you want to call it. Texas is the Reason wasn't that. So it's like, okay, but they were always good. They're indie rock, whatever you want to say. But even I assume that affected like how much appreciated Texas is the Reason. So I'm probably just not fully remembering that.
Well, one thing that was always cool to me about Brooklyn Vegan, even before I was on board, is like, you know, you covered when they reunited. And I did feel like there were bands from that world that, you know, like you said, you personally having this like diverse musical background, you knew that that was cool, even if like the sort of greater indie rock hype machine universe wouldn't have been as excited for this reunion the first time they reunited as maybe the second or third time they reunited, and then emo is like now cool or something. And yeah, I mean, like I've spent a lot of time writing about how bands like Texas the Reason are really indie rock bands, whereas like Fall Out Boy, we could just say are like more of a pop punk band. But then also the more time you kind of spend with all this stuff, the more you're like, well, it is also all coming from the same place. You know, like Fall Out Boy are just the poppiest conclusion of what Gorilla Biscuit started. So it's all connected. And these days, we are just as excited for My Chemical Romance as we are for Texas the Reason. So it even feels like the era of like, oh, this emo, not that emo, like that's even over now. But yeah, and it also it wasn't even just the mall emo stuff, because the next emo band I'll talk about, but we'll wait because I want to hear some of the stuff Bill likes, is a band who, like, I mean, Pitchfork was trashing before mall emo was a term. So there was like, I've interviewed like, you know, bands like American Football and Mineral and like these more 90s emo bands that are really more indie rock. And they'll say like they hated the word emo even then. Like it just felt like a diss, even in the 90s. Like, so it just kind of, I mean, Ian MacKaye hated the word emo when it was like first used in 1986 or something. So it just kind of always had a stigma. And then, yeah, by the time of the Hot Topic bands, it was just the easiest thing to pick on. And so like, I remember when the Get Up Kids reunited, they like apologized for influencing mall emo or something, which is a quote that I think they feel a little guilty about these days. Go listen to the BV Interviews episode with the Get Up Kids from a few years back for them to have to confront the fact that they said that 15 years ago.
I was just going to add, you know, much like emo being a bad word, you know, you could say the same for shoegaze or trip hop or a lot of genres. You know, they just sort of were often pejoratives from snobby journalists, or like, you know, twee music. That was a term started by journalists who were being dismissive, but now it's an easy catch-all for records, and you know, everything mellows with time, I guess.
Like indie sleaze.
I was going to get to indie sleaze, but yeah, is indie sleaze a bad word? I don't.
Yeah, but we're talking about terms that were actually existed at the time of the bands instead of something that's been foisted upon them 20 years later.
So chill wave, which was actually coined by, I think, Hipster Runoff.
Yeah, Hipster Runoff. Yeah. Right. Like that's a perfect example of a word that it felt so stupid to use, but it just was easier to use it.
So it wasn't exactly a diss, but it was created as kind of a joke.
Anyway, yeah, my list, I wouldn't say that the records that I'll talk about, the 10 that I picked, are my all-time favorite records from 1996, but I feel like they're all important in their own ways, and I love every single one of these records. Well, the first of them is Beck's Odelay, which I'm going to nominate for the most 1996 album ever. It's just, when you think of the mid-90s and it's got the irony, you can't take away like 90s sort of slacker irony away from this record, but it also has like plunderphonic production that mixes rock, hip hop, and Beck's sort of anti-folk roots. His lyrics are like refrigerator magnet poetry, but are kind of awesome at the same time. This feels like a very like unavoidable record that crossed genres of people who listen to it. You know, like hip hop people listen to Beck, cool downtown other music clerks listen to Beck, and regular people listen to Beck. But you know, this had huge singles. It had unforgettable music videos, and I sort of feel like you just can't talk about 1996 without bringing up Odelay. The record was produced by the Dust Brothers, who brought their Paul's Boutique collage sampling style to what Beck had already sort of done with his previous record, Mellow Gold, but really layered on the samples and the craziness. It feels like he packed this record with every idea he ever had and actually said, I thought Odelay might be the last time I ever got a chance to make a record. And you can sort of feel that way. The singles, Where It's At, Devil's Haircut, and The New Pollution are all classics that you couldn't turn on MTV for more than 10 minutes and see at the time. And again, all those videos are nearly as influential. And I just think it's a great record. It's aged a little bit. It's when I say it's the most 1996 album, it's also got a little bit of that like Frozen in Amber sort of feel to it. It's dated a little bit, but it's still a lot of fun to listen to, and you really have to appreciate what he did at the time and what the Dust Brothers did at the time.
I agree. Beck is not somebody who it occurs to me to go back and listen to a lot. I lived through the hits on this album, being on the radio. I mean, I was a huge Beastie Boys fan. I was definitely very, very aware of Beck. I didn't buy Beck albums, I guess, but I was very just aware of Beck and listening to whatever was on. And I did go back and listen to this album yesterday before we were recording this. And I agree. It's like a fun, super 1996. It put me back there. I bring up Beastie Boys on purpose, the vibe of that time that the Beastie Boys also had.
I mean, by the time of this, like the Beastie Boys had become an actual band who played instruments. Odelay felt like a sequel to Paul's Boutique in a lot of ways, just in the mishmash collage style, you know? And it was also a thing where Paul's Boutique was kind of a flop at the time. Like it didn't do well, but then very quickly got rediscovered by the mid 2000s. So it felt like almost the perfect time for a record like Odelay. And I agree with you, Dave. This is not a record that I go back and listen to a lot, but when I think about 1996, this is one of the first things that comes to mind.
Talking about like living in the moment versus reevaluation or realizing things later. Brooklyn Vegan again started in 2004, and it was at maybe around 2003 that I really started kind of diving into what was cool or what like the larger world of indie rock was. And so I do remember I would learn a lot of things. Like I would learn, oh, this band that I like is super uncool. This band who I just would never have like assumed is super cool. Beck was always super cool. Like you said, he had the downtown, the cool kids, despite being like the most mainstream, big, huge hit artist who he still lives in that world to this day. I've said on previous episodes how it's like almost guaranteed if Beck puts out an album, even if you don't realize it, it's going to get nominated for a Grammy. I mean, not realize it even came out, but it'll still get nominated for a Grammy in 2025 and 2026. He's kind of like the mainstream still loves him. He's still going to be on a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, like special taping in the band of whatever supergroup they're doing. He's going to get all those huge looks. And like Radiohead or any of the other bands who kind of like exemplified the untouchable cool of indie rock, of the Brooklyn Vegan world, like Beck lived in that. Absolutely. And like you said, Paul's Boutique, Beastie Boys, another one who I don't think I had any doubt. But yeah, Beastie Boys, who I was a huge fan of, also lived in there, maybe less these days.
Well, Beastie Boys are a fun one because like License to Ill is kind of some of the most like bro-y music, but then Paul's Boutique is for hipsters. And I like both. I'm not dissing either. But I feel like they like you could know like girls and fight for your right to party and be a little surprised to learn that the Beastie Boys are hipster cool.
Right. And like Texas the Reason came out of the hardcore scene.
I was going to say, I'm going to issue a quick correction, Bill. By the mid 90s, the Beastie Boys were playing actual instruments again.
Right.
There you go.
Right.
I have tried to become a Beck fan so many times and it's never happened. I agree from afar that he exemplifies the 90s. it feels extremely 90s to me when you listen to like that era Beck. Again, like kind of came to, I don't remember exactly when, but like I knew I loved so many artists that were in the same orbit as Beck. So I was like, oh, I'm sure I love Beck. And it just never happened. And I've tried so many times. All the respect in the world. Who knows? Maybe it'll click one day. I continue to surprise myself.
You also have to like think about Beck's influence more with Mellow Gold and Loser, really, but it clearly inspired things like Butthole Surfer's Pepper.
And I love that song.
Right. So you like the things that inspired it, maybe. Or there was a Brand Van 3000 song called Drinking in LA, which is very Beck. And I'm sure there's like 5 other tracks that are just sort of like, you can imagine bands who are like on their way out or trying to find a hit, hearing Loser and deciding to do something. Let's put a hip hop beat behind this,
Are Luscious Jackson, where do they fit into this whole thing?
Well, I mean, they grew up with the Beastie Boys, and so I think they had that cool right there, and they were more of a live band from the beginning. Luscious Jackson, very cool. I don't know if I would call them Beck-esque, but it all fits in that world for sure. They were all probably in the same issue of Grand Royal together in 1996, if Grand Royal existed then. I think it did.
All right, I just actually found this quote about Luscious Jackson from a 1999 CNN article, which I think got to give some respect to Luscious Jackson here. So I'll just read this to end this segment. But if anything, Luscious Jackson was always ahead of its time, presaging Beck and the Beastie Boys by dabbling in samples and funk beats. And from the start, this is a band that wowed critics, prompting Entertainment Weekly's Jeremy Hellegar to describe 1994's natural ingredients as impossible to peg. Think funk, punk, jazz, pop, disco, and hip-hop, but so nicely balanced that unlike the Beasties, the group never seemed indecisive or schizophrenic.
Wow. Also, props to CNN.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks for tuning in. Dave and I will be back every Friday morning with new episodes of BB Weekly. And in between the episodes, you can always get much more from us at brooklynvegan.com, on all of our social media, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. You can pick up records from us at shop.brooklynvegan.com. And if you like what you hear, tell your friends about us, subscribe to the show, give us a good rating. All that little stuff goes a really long way. It really helps us a lot, and we really appreciate it. So until then, thank you again, and see you next time.